So welcome again, Malini, and thank you very much for the excellent video lecture and of course for making time to sit with us. Let's start immediately. Perhaps if you can just recap somehow the Google tax in India, and then let us know also how significant was the increase in tax revenue for India after imposing the Google tax. And also related to that, so we just wrap up the discussion on the Google tax. What was the response of India, or perhaps France, if you know, to the retaliation by the US on the DST imposed on American tech companies?
Okay, thank you so much, Edlira. I'm really happy to be here and honored to be here. And thank you all for those who have taken the course. But also, I'm really glad to see some faces because that makes it all the more interesting. And of course, you're speaking to a human being. So to answer your questions, should I talk a little bit about what is the Google tax, when it was introduced and all that? And
yeah. Perhaps just to recap, I mean, people have watched your video lecture, I'm sure, but it's good to just, summarize that briefly.
Absolutely. So the whole idea of this Google tax, as you might have noticed in the lecture also, India was one of the first ones to introduce it. Now, in India, it's known as equalization levy, and the whole idea was that in the current tax regulations, which have been in place, for more than a century. And the idea was that only those which are brick and mortar companies, they get taxed. Now, over time, of course, with influence of ICT, what has happened is there are a lot of companies which actually provide services or sell their goods and services in different countries, but don't really have any brick and mortar company, in the sense they don't have any physical presence there. So they don't have any physical presence in terms of whether it's an office that they have, and therefore they don't have any employees. So what happens is often these companies do not have to pay taxes, even though they earn revenue and profit from these various countries. So what has been happening, that there has been a tussle going on, and an international agreement that has been, coming for many years, specifically since the global financial crisis of 2008. The developed countries woke up that they are also losing profit for various reasons. So this new deal had to come in, which is just coming in July 2021, this year. But then India realized that India has very poor tax to GDP ratio, and it needs to ramp up its taxes very badly. And what it realized, that India is a big country, as you know, in terms of population, also in terms of GDP. So these companies, mainly digital companies, have been making a lot of profit, but don't pay any taxes. So what India decided is to go ahead with the unilateral digital tax. Initially, now this was introduced in 2016, and initially the idea was only digital advertisement above a certain threshold of, US 1,400 per annum. They are the only ones who get taxed. This was fine, but it's a very, very narrow aspect. So what India did in March 2020 is expanded the scope of equalization levy and brought in e-commerce companies. So e-commerce is very essential, because let's say Amazon or Netflix or Google. Now, none of these, we all watch Google at our homes. Of course, there are, many people also work in Amazon. The whole idea, therefore, is these companies also should have come under the tax net if they're not paying taxes in India. So therefore, India kind of introduced another aspect to this equalization levy, which was mainly on e-commerce, and a very nominal tax rate of 2%. Now, this is the background against which I'm sure all of you have gone through this whole thing of the new global deal that is taking place, and is supposed to be, all countries are supposed to come to a resolution by next year. So this is the background. In terms of the revenue that India has been generating, the first bit of equalization levy was 6%, and only mainly on digital advertising and related services. But what has been extremely encouraging is that the growth of revenue has been pretty good. Now, of course, because it's such a nominal tax, in terms of the total revenue earned, it's not so big. But the whole idea is it has been growing significantly. And then since 2020, when the equalization levy of 2% was introduced on e-commerce companies, it has also gone up significantly. So, over, let's say, from 2016, on an average, it has been growing at the rate of, let's say, 30 to 40%. So initial years, there's been a huge growth simply because it came on low base. But what we also noticed that even during COVID, and actually, in fact, during COVID, because people move to digital or e-commerce companies a lot more, there has been a huge jump in revenue. So in terms of total revenue earned, it's not a significant amount yet, but at the same time, it does show a lot of promise. So I'll stop here for the time being. Oh yeah, you asked me another thing, that what has India done in terms of, when US retaliated. Now, this retaliation aspect came in March this year, March 2021, when US trade representative, they came back and saying that you are actually taxing all US companies. So I'm going to tax your products. So it could be agriculture products and a whole lot of things. They did the same thing for France. Now, what the India stand has been, and they calculated, that how much India earns annually from this digital tax. The annual calculation done by US trade representative is so small. It's 55 million US dollar. So if you look at the context of the entire trade taking place, it's a drop in the ocean. And therefore, India said that, this is so small for you that you can let it go. And second, this is a temporary thing in any case, because the whole idea is once you have a multilateral tax deal, then these unilateral measures won't be required. So that was the whole thing. But then Biden administration came in, and there was also this global deal in the making. So therefore, US government kind of stalled it, put a stop on the trade moves or the retaliatory moves they had planned. I hope that makes it clear.
Thank you. Well, we'll hear from the participants if they have any question or comment on this issue or any other issue related to the video lecture.
Yeah, and I hope you don't mind having my tea.
Of course, we are all having tea or water or coffee. Yes, Ian, please.
How do you see the new global corporate minimum tax rate have an impact on the digital economy in India and small island developing states?
And small emerging.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much. That's a very interesting question because, that is the major talk going on today. And let me tell you that the deal that is happening, G24 countries today actually have gone and said that we cannot have a unilateral taxes like this, cannot be moved out at one go. So let me say that what happens in the case of India. Now the deal has two pillars. The pillar one, which is supposed to, have a more fair distribution of taxes, that says that once you have the deal, then digital taxes like the one India has done, which are unilateral moves, they need to go away completely, which is not a problem by itself, because if countries get to tax various multinational corporations at let's say a minimum rate, that's perfectly fine. Unfortunately, the deal, there are conditions in the deal which make the deal not so attractive. Let me tell you why. Now, there are two things in the deal which says that the threshold level of companies which can be taxed is extremely high. So it says euro 20 billion means companies making a global profit or global turnover of at least euro 20 billion. Only they are the ones which can come under this tax. Second, the condition is that the amount that can be taxed is also very low. amount, as in the profit that these companies earn, that's also very low. What is the condition? It says only those companies among these huge, big companies earning at least euro 20 billion, only those companies which register a profit of more than 10%, you can only tax those. So basically, let's say a company says, or let's say Netflix says that, okay, we have earned a profit of 12%. So it is 2% over and above the 10% that the minimum that they are supposed to earn. So what they're saying, the deal says, okay, the developing countries or all these countries can only tax on the extra 2%, but how much? Not even the entire. It's only 20 to 30%. So if, let's say, am I making myself clear? Just interrupt me in case I'm not. So now look at this. It's extremely unfair, or extremely, how do I say? It's not exactly what the developing countries, including India, has been fighting for. Why? Because if you look at India's digital tax, what in any case, developing countries have been saying that the threshold level should be 1 euro billion, not 20. So you can see the moment that happens, huge number of companies can no longer be taxed. And what you're left with, barely 100 huge or mega companies that can be taxed. Second is what developing countries have also been saying, that listen, let us tax at least 30 to 50% of the residual tax, which is over and above the 10%. The deal right now is 20 to 30, whereas G7 has been saying only 20. The OECD one is saying 20 to 30%. And that is the crux. In terms of India's, equalization levy, the threshold right now is 0.2 euro billion. So if this comes in, and then, India can actually tax about 5,000 odd companies, which comes in under the threshold. With the deal, that won't happen. Second is the, I'll just finish, and also the rate of what India has been doing is taxing actually total transactions, not profit. Now, if you understand, companies can tweak profit by using various accounting methods and actually show they're earning less than 10%. And I'll give you an example why this is an issue. Is because, let's say, Amazon, we all know they make huge profits. They're not very good in terms of their worker relations or conditions of working at Amazon. Even they don't earn 10% of profit of their revenue. So even the 100 that one is talking about, one is not sure what happens after that. Yeah, you raised your hand.
Yeah, a follow-up question. I also noted the extractive sector and financial services were excluded. Do you have some opinions on that?
Yes, absolutely. See, these are called carve-outs. So London, as in the UK government has said that, look, financial sector, that's where we earn our money, and a 15% tax rate, that's for according to Pillar 2. 15% tax rate is too high in terms of that. So please move that out. China has said that, we put a lot of investment into R&D. So those companies which are doing R&D, they should also be not in it. And then other countries. Now, this is the whole thing. What you need to understand, there's a political economy. Why? Because developing countries have been losing taxes because of this global supply chain for many years now. Now, the global financial crisis of 2007-8 kind of made developed countries wake up, right? And that is when they started pushing for this, that, it became an issue. It wasn't so as big an issue as long as only developing countries were losing out. The financial crisis made the governments of various countries realize that they need to raise more revenue. And how do they do that unless companies are paid? So the whole idea is, even for this instance, this deal wouldn't have happened had US not been in compliance, right? The idea is that you put a minimum tax rate and say, okay, now you need a global deal. So of course you need all countries to come together. So this is more like, kind of placating everybody that, okay, it's not just the minimum tax rate, but we're also saying you get to tax some bit of extra profits that our companies make. So the whole thing is, but at the same time, they're giving concessions. So the idea is, since you need a consensus among, you have to take into account some of the big countries, what they are saying, and therefore these carve-outs. And these carve-outs are actually kind of reduce the scope of taxation. So that's a very good question. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Malini. Somebody else has a question or a comment? I mean, even clarificatory questions. Of course, we understand this is a topic that may be difficult for many to, grapple with. So it's completely okay to ask clarificatory questions because that's why we're here.
In fact, let me share with you, it's difficult for me also to understand. I had to spend hours to try and understand because, the language in which it's written, the small fine print, what is written, those are things that are so difficult. So, therefore, I know a bit about the Indian digital tax system. But what happens, for instance, Indonesia? That's another country which also has a digital tax system, digital tax in place, and has been opposing this deal. Why is it? It's very different from the reasons why India is doing. So the main thing is that it's difficult for all of us.
So, somebody wants to make a question? Yes, Alejandra.
Hello, how are you? I'm Alejandra, I'm from Argentina. And when you were talking, I was thinking these big discussions we're having all around the world against taxes. And I wanted to know, how did the population in India take this taxation? Because here in Argentina, for example, there's not a tax for companies, but there's a tax for using dollars as the exchange. When you pay in dollars, you are charged 30% more than the rate. For example, Facebook is asking you to pay, you are billed 30% more. And there are many people that started to work as this entrepreneurial way, like I am my own boss. Mm-hmm. And so they use these kind of platforms to market themselves, and they feel like the state is stealing from them part of their profit. Like it's really difficult to talk about more taxes in Argentina in this moment. For example, there's a liberal party that we weren't expecting them to have those many votes in the last elections, and he grew with this discourse. So I wanted to know, how is it going around the world, and to see if it's a general matter of concern for all of us.
Okay, there are two aspects to it, as I understand. One is the taxation on profits, which small entrepreneurs, like you said, find it to be unfair, right? Because they're not big entrepreneurs, they're not big companies. So tax really does lower the profit they earn, and therefore their employability. Those are very understandable. So therefore, for instance, the whole idea was, I don't know how it is in Argentina now, that the bigger companies should be paying higher taxes, and the smaller companies should be paying lower taxes. But the difference between Argentina and India is that Argentina depends a lot more in terms of the amount of revenue as percentage of GDP. Tax to GDP ratio is much higher than India's. I'll give you a sense that India's tax to GDP ratio is barely 17%, 17. Whereas I think Argentina's is about 36 or so as percentage of GDP. So, and within this 17% that India generates, you won't believe it, 11% is from indirect taxes. And indirect taxes, as in taxes on fuel, which necessarily what happens, is that, let's say, petrol or diesel are inputs which are used in everything, right? If you have to transport anything, even food, let's say, from the farm to the retail market, you have to use diesel. So any increase in taxes on this affects the prices of goods and services. As a result, what happens is the poorer people who pay out a lot more in taxes compared to the income they earn. And this also happens, why? Because poorer people, their large percentage of their income goes for basic consumption. Whereas, let's say, those who are better off, or even, let's say, middle class like me, we don't spend 50% of food or basic. No, we also have some money left for saving. Now, the problem is because of COVID, one is the government has been reducing tax rates on corporates. This is extremely inequalizing because these corporates have been making huge profits. And I'm not talking about the small ones, I'm talking of the big ones. Because in India, what we have is a peculiar case. Because of various kinds of tax incentives that are given, the bigger corporates pay lower taxes, whereas the smaller companies pay a higher rate of tax. So therefore, it is already inequalizing. And it has become even more so during COVID, because a lot of companies could not work because of complete lockdown. Therefore, what has happened, the government has to raise revenue, what they have done. And India is the only country in the world which has done it. It raised taxes further on petrol and diesel, which the poor people really cannot afford. And so right now we are in a situation of, let's say, about 7 to 8% inflation, whereas people have actually lost jobs and lost their livelihoods. So, but for basic consumption, the prices are constantly going up. So in terms of your question, that whether people like, corporates being taxed, of course, those who are on the corporate side, they don't like it. But the government has been giving concession. But I'll also tell you one thing, that, the whole issue of taxation is seen as a very technical thing. So not many people get into it. So there is not a lot of discussions, except at a certain, certain percentage of the population who discuss it. But even there's a lot of wrong ideas. So in terms of what people can feel, that they feel in their day-to-day lives, are that when inflation happens or prices go up, then they can instinctively feel, and of course listen on the news, that this is because of taxes on petrol has gone up. So in terms of, what is happening in the international deal, no, not really. Nobody has the time or the temerity to get involved with it.
Thank you, Malini. Any other question? And I think there was a comment from me, and while you were speaking, Malini, saying that you have also the increase in income inequality, of course, with this. So Philip, did you want to say something, or was that by mistake?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
please, go ahead.
sure.
And you can just say where you're from. So Malini.
I'm from South Africa, in Cape Town. I'm originally from Limpopo in Cape Town. That's where I'm staying at the moment. Okay. I want to ask. India is what is it called? The call center is. Apparently it's got a big call centers. Yeah, apparently it's big in call centers. You have corporations. I don't know whether it's from all over the world, but I heard mainly from the US. If you call a company, a corporation in the US, you instead of speaking to the company directly, you find the call centers in India.
Yeah.
And is it that also having to do with digital tax?
Well, yes, in the sense, these call centers have people employed there, right? And they have offices. So these are the companies which have a brick and mortar model. So these call centers pay taxes to the Indian government, just like any firm does in India. So these do not come under digital tax. They do not. But suppose, you open up Google, you'll see an ad, right? And that ad can be anything from different parts of the world. So when such ads are placed, when you open up Google or you open up any website, those ads are the ones, because they are directed at Indian consumers. So those ads, a bit of it gets taxed under this digital tax, not the call centers. Call centers have their own taxation system, just like all other companies do in India. But have you people seen any movie how call centers have been, fake call centers have come up and they have scammed thousands of people? There have been movies made on that too.
Yes, and then I've seen some in India, right?
Yeah,
Some
exactly.
placed in India. Mhm.
Exactly. In fact, call center reminds me, which is slightly a digression, that it's not just people, who call up a US company and land up in India. I mean, a call center in India. The system of that is what has happened to various companies now. That, they have been cutting down costs, and information and communication technology has aided that a lot. So what happens even in India, for instance, I need to talk to my bank. I will not be able to talk to my bank people who directly work. I will be put through a call center, which is service provider to the bank. So this is something which is a part and parcel of, in fact, I would say this is also a part and parcel of the global supply chain.
Thank you. If there is no other question, perhaps we can jump to the second question for the workshop. And it's basically about, the fact that the digital profit tax has been described as the unitary tax with a formula appointment for tech companies, right? So comparing India's Google tax to the proposed digital profit taxes, what do you think are the pros and cons that might be considered?
Okay. I had touched upon it. Let me go into a little more. Let me reiterate some of the points. The Google tax as it exists now, as I said, the threshold level is 0.2 euro billion, the digital tax in India, whereas the global deal says 20 euro billion. These are the companies, only those who can be taxed. Second aspect is that the digital tax in India taxes on transactions. So it is not taxing companies on the basis of the profit they make. What this means is that it's not net income of the profit, it's of the total transaction, which has of course raised a lot of objections. But the global deal says you can't do it on transactions, which is fine, because profit is revenue minus the cost. So the moment you take away the cost, the scope of the tax reduces. These are the main two things. And also, as I said, what India had wanted, not just India and other developing countries had wanted, that the formula that has been thought of right now is that only those companies which earn at least euro 20 billion, and only if they earn more than 10% profit can they be taxed. What the developing countries had said is that don't do that. This is a residual profit method. Instead, what you say is that a global company, all its subsidiaries taken together, they should be seen as a total profits of that company. So, Amazon India, or let's say Apple China, Apple US, Apple Ireland, these are now seen as different subsidiaries and different companies. So the idea what that developing countries put forward is don't see it as different subsidiaries, and take the total profit of these companies. Then apportion them according to different areas from where they're making this profit. So even if they don't have a company or a physical company in a country, what you can look at is how many users are they catering to, how much sales are they doing, or do they have employees, and accordingly distribute wherever they're getting their revenue from and let them tax. So in terms of, the cons, these are the cons that, if India is to give up its digital tax, which is a unilateral method, it would lose. In fact, recently IMF has done a basic calculation. Even that one shows that countries like India, Indonesia, if they go through with the deal, they actually lose revenue. So there are a lot of cons. Pros is, I'm not sure what the pros are, because the way the deal has been shaped so far, it doesn't have so much deal. And that is the reason why today G24 countries have said that let's not do away with, these taxes at one go. We'll do it slowly over time. Now, the idea, what is the idea behind that? That, okay, since we don't know how many companies we'll get to tax, and it does leave out lot many that we had been able to tax so far, what we say is the companies which will be taxed under the global deal, those won't be taxed under the unilateral country-wise digital taxes. But the companies which do not come under the global deal, at least they can continue to be taxed and slowly peter it out. So that's the G24, what they have put forth today. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the explanation. Anybody has any question? Yes, Ian.
What role do you see the World Trade Organization General Agreement on Trades and Services, that type of mechanism, have to play in terms of addressing these issues? From my standpoint, for the most part, World Trade Organization mechanism haven't really been effective, despite you have all these systems for consensus decision making and other issues.
I don't know whether I caught your question fully. What I understand, you're saying that
what role
does
the
WTO have?
WTO mechanism, from your standpoint, what role can it function to address these types of issues?
Well, I don't know whether the WTO by itself can, have a role in this, because that's for trade agreements. Yes, they do, because there are a lot of tax that comes in. But I would have a different argument here that, even for WTO agreement, there has been a consensus, a deal that was based on consensus. But we also know that the way the deal has been drawn up, it does not favor developing countries at all, and it does favor. There's a bias towards developed countries. What I would say is that, in terms of the global deal of international taxation, I really hope that is not what we get into, even in this taxation. But beyond that, I'm not very sure that, I'm not the right person to answer what role WTO can play. Thank you.
Somebody else has a question on the complex topic? Yes, Philip.
When India come to introduce this digital tax, did they take environment into consideration? Because these digital devices, when they're no longer useful, they pollute the environment. And then also from the fact that the way they're designed to break quickly, so people can go back to buy more and more. As it has previously said, we are consumer society. We have to buy all the time, even unnecessarily. Did when India come to, did you take that into consideration?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. And what I would say is that I really don't think environment was, saving the environment or reducing climate change actions impacts was at the core of the decision for this taxation. No. It is mainly to raise more revenue. So the environment aspect is not really. In fact, while the government of India has been making a lot of strides in terms of, bringing back or building renewable energy and all that, this was not really the consideration here, because that would have a different aspect that, you then cannot consume so much. This is on companies. So it doesn't affect consumption so much, because unless the companies pass it on to consumers, so that by itself really cannot reduce consumption or affect prices that, to the extent that consumers buy less. No. This is merely a revenue raising tool.
Thank you, but still a good question for the
Very good question.
Yes, Philip. Yes, please.
I don't know this is if this has been addressed. If it's addressed, I didn't hear it. Okay. How about from the fact that China is, when it comes to digital devices, it is the main producer of digital devices, which ends in America, and then now this issue about tax on it, America trying to clamp on China. So, so what about the tax? I mean, do you have digital devices that are coming from China in India? And then if you have, so so now, what's happening when it comes to tax between America? Because you mostly mentioned America, that is complaining that it's the most taxed, and then it's there's a problem there.
Yeah, the reason why America has been complaining is because, see, these are the companies. Digital taxes has been on digital tech giants, right? And all these companies are basically based either in USA or some of the developed countries. Therefore, US has been saying that you are unnecessarily taxing my companies, the companies which are originate from my country, and therefore I don't get to tax it, because there will be then double taxation problem. The issue you're talking about of devices being manufactured by China and India importing it, that's an entirely different tax, because that is an import tariff that India has on taxation. So that is not the equalization level. So the devices by itself coming is not the issue. The issue is, suppose I buy that device from Amazon online, right? Then what happens? I, as an Indian company, buy it from Amazon and distribute within India to consumers in India. Then I, as the Indian company, need to put a withholding tax on the transaction that I have done with Amazon based in, let's say, Netherlands. That I withhold of the total transaction value and then pay to the Indian government. So these are not on devices per se, it's on devices or any transactions happening online. Right, so devices by itself has an import duty, which follows the norm of the WTO norms. But this is in addition, and that is why a lot of people have been, getting angry that how can you do this? The whole thing is not the consumers, the companies have been getting angry. The point is, I read a very interesting article, because you will find a lot of people from the developed world also who understand the unfairness of or look at it as that it's an unfair system. So somebody said that, don't look at it as a unilateral tax. Look at it as a defensive measures that developing countries are forced to take up. So, because there was no deal, these companies earn money based on Indian residents using their services, but they don't pay any taxes, right? Which is a free ride. So see it as a defense mechanism, because developing countries really do not have that much geopolitical weight or power. So so devices, I hope I have answered your question. The devices bit is a different kind of tax. The online services or transactions is what the digital tax is about.
Thank you, Malini, and perhaps also taking up on the last argument you're making in your video lecture about the fact that still India, even if a developing country, is in a position to kind of set up unilaterally a defense mechanism and the space for other smaller countries. I mean, and I think we had in our discussion, for instance, Bangladesh, it would be much more difficult to actually go that route, you know. So, and that's why perhaps the effort has been always towards multilateralism. So if you can perhaps, you know, develop a bit more and tell us whether there have been examples of, let's say, less powerful countries in the developing world that are trying to do the same, but have had to step back and so.
Well, no, not that, but I can tell you a very interesting thing that has happened for the global deal. As you know, that about 139 countries had come under this whole global deal and decided to have talks and decide on a consensus. Some countries have still not decided, means they have refused to sign the deal. And I think one of them is Kenya. Now, that's a very interesting thing. Why? Because they said, we don't agree, this is a completely unfair system. And I do not agree with this deal and I refuse to sign it. Whereas countries like India, China, you know, they were opposed to the deal initially because they say it's not fair. They were very ambivalent, but now they've also signed the deal. The Kenya thing is very interesting. You know why? Because Kenya actually doesn't have much trade with US or the developed countries. It has a lot of trade with India and China. So these are the big countries with which it trades. So in terms of retaliation, that it doesn't come from, it doesn't have the fear that US is going to retaliate against Kenya. Therefore, it can actually take the stand and say that, no, I don't like the deal. Whereas, let's say Bangladesh, it depends on US or European countries for markets of its own exports. So Bangladesh doesn't have a digital tax, but it has signed the deal knowing very well that let's say not just pillar 1, the pillar 2, that the minimum tax rate that has been fixed, it's way lower than the tax rate that they have in their country. So it's geopolitics, of course, matters, and the trade relations in that, who depends on who for their income they earn from their exports. That's also very interesting. So I don't know whether a lot of countries have to go back, because this whole thing of retaliation by US is a very nascent thing. It's barely 6 months or so. And soon after that, the Biden administration came and this global deals talk started moving forward. That is when US has now kind of paused its retaliatory measures in the hope that a global deal by itself will take care of these things. So that's why, for instance, as I said earlier, I don't, maybe I did not, I don't remember, that India had said that, according to your calculations, India makes such little revenue from this digital tax, you should actually drop it. But India can say it, US need not listen. So it all depends on geopolitics, yes, of course. For the time being, it's on hold. Let's see what happens with the deal. But some people are also saying that, G24 coming back and saying that we will not withdraw all digital taxes at one go. We'll do it over time, not at one go. That by itself could derail the talks so far. But let's see.
Nigeria too, right? Nigeria has also declined it. So
yes, Nigeria. I think it's Nigeria rather than Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Alejandra, did you want to say something? Yes, please.
No, I was thinking about it's from before, not from this geopolitic subject, but you mentioned that these are the companies being taxed are companies that don't generate work jobs in the local countries. Which criteria should we use to tax? I was thinking about that. It's not a clear idea, the one I have, but it's how do we qualify these tech companies, big tech companies, and which are not big tech companies? Is it related to the creation of jobs or not? How do we discriminate?
Excellent question. Let me tell you, it's a very good question, simply because these are also some of the aspects which have been discussed. So when developing countries have been saying that, look, even if you don't have physical presence, right, you should be taxed. Now, they have given various ways that you can actually tax, on the basis of which these companies can be taxed. So one is sales. How much sales do you, let's say, make in Argentina? So Amazon or Apple does not have an office or a brick and mortar company there. So what it does, but people use Apple, right? They use Mac, they use Apple. So this all is happening. It's coming from somewhere else, but there's no company. So what Argentina can say that, look, you make profit by selling to residents of Argentina, right? So why shouldn't you pay us taxes? So one is sales. Then Netflix, right? It's not selling. It's also kind of the number of users you have of Netflix in India. Now, India is, as you know, is a poor country, but it's got many people, right? So for instance, even those who are considered to be slightly better off and can afford Netflix, even though as percentage of the total population, it's very small, the number is huge, right? So for Netflix, countries like India are a very important country. So one is sales, another is users. Then also there's this thing, how many people do you employ? So you have this Amazon, let's say in India, they are not companies, Amazon company, but you do have these warehouses where the goods come and then people deliver. These should be considered as people who are directly or indirectly employed for this work. So how many are they? How many people? So there are various ways that developing countries have been saying that, these are the indicators you can use to understand how much these companies have been making profits and from which country. So there are different ways. It's not an easy thing. It's very complicated. But yes, your question was very good because it actually has been discussed and is being discussed.
For example, Netflix in Argentina is making local productions, like they are hiring actors and making, so they can reply to this. You don't have an office here, we have to pay to the United States, but they are producing local fiction.
Money Heist is Argentina based or what?
What? I'm sorry.
Money Heist, that Netflix series. Money Heist.
I don't understand that word.
That's happening even in India. They are producing, products for the Indian consumers. So you have Indian actors and all that.
Yeah.
But the point is, those are different kinds of taxes. But when it comes to, when I'm watching, let's say when I go to a movie theater, right, I pay a tax. There is a tax element that is therein for such this thing. But if I buy Netflix, I pay a certain fee to Netflix every month, right? Nothing, no taxes being paid. So the whole thing is that Netflix should also pay some taxes, just like movie theaters have to pay some taxes. So that's the whole idea.
They pay taxes here, but they transferred it to users. We are paying more.
Yeah, so that is also another issue that, a lot of times they transfer it. That is the next set of issues that are likely to come up. That, even if you increase taxes on corporates, they transfer it to consumers. So that also kind of becomes self-defeating. So somebody has to pay.
Thank you for that. Malini, there is a comment or question from Afuva, but Afuva has had problems with the connection. But can you try, Afuva, to actually, because I'm not very sure, can you read Malini?
Yeah, I think the question is, are there any new tax incentives as per Indian government relating to the Google tax? Tax incentives relating to Google tax. Well, I am not very sure. Really. I think this is something I'll have to look up. Sorry about that.
Yeah, thank you. And just perhaps say also to Alejandra that we had this discussion also with Jason Ward about what would be the indicators, on which to tax these companies. And if you want, you can go and watch the workshop video lecture because one thing he was suggesting was also just the number of population.
Yeah.
If you have services such as Facebook, for instance, that we know they're really like widespread in all across the world, you can automatically say this is the population, so that's also
exactly that's what I meant by users, population who uses Facebook. And now Facebook is unlike Netflix. Let's say Netflix, you have to pay a fee which is pretty high in India, so not everybody can access it, but Facebook is a free thing. So almost the entire population which has a digital phone or some kind of device where they access Facebook, they access WhatsApp. So these are things so Facebook will show you advertisement, right? And that's how Facebook earns revenue. But nothing comes to India had it not been for this digital tax.
Very interesting. Thank you. And Malini, as a final point, I don't know whether anybody has any burning question, but if not, as a final point, if you can, and also to wrap up, if you can just share with us, how is your center, your institution actually working with organizations on the ground? You're really producing great research and strong arguments. So who are you working with, and how are you pushing for the recommendations that you are making out of your research? And perhaps Philip, did you want to say something, and then Malini can pick up both?
Yes. Okay. As I speak, Amazon is intending to build its headquarters in Cape Town. It's going to cost about 4.5 billion, and then it's promising jobs. And then there's opposition to it because they want to build it on the historical site for pre-colonial people from and then also for environment. So there's opposition to it. So what advices can you I get from you to share with other people in this regard?
Well, I don't know whether South Africa the environment issue, for instance, I definitely think that countries, developing countries like South Africa, India, they should definitely have an environment-related tax, that if you are creating, which China does actually, flouting a lot of environmental norms, then you need to pay a let's say, penalty. So it cannot be a tax really, but a penalty kind of thing. So that takes care of the environment issue also, as well as helps in raising revenue if they do it. But there's a problem in it. Say, for instance, Amazon says, okay, if I try and adhere to environmental regulations, then my cost of operation goes up hugely, right? So what I can do is pay a nominal amount and go on flouting environmental norms. So I think taxation is only one tool that can be used. And given that the geopolitics again comes in, MNCs are extremely powerful compared to the countries. So therefore, the whole thing is, tax can only be one tool. There has to be norms of the government, every government needs to have and actually follow it, so that not just MNCs, even the domestic companies do not flout these norms. That has to come in somewhere, because I think climate crisis as we face today is a real crisis. We can keep on pushing it under the carpet, but it needs to be done. But I think tax is just one tool. How much it can help? It can help in raising revenue, perhaps, but I'm not sure for a company like Amazon, if they kind of pay a small penalty and get away with it, which ensures that their cost of production or cost of operation does not increase too much, maybe they can just do that also. I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you, Malini. And then perhaps just to wrap up on this question of who are you working with? And
okay, that's a very, thank you. In fact, you mentioned Jason Ward. What we realized that we are a group of, let's say, CSOs, right? There is a CSO called Public Services International. They are CSOs of a union of various labor unions and working people.
Global Union of Public Services.
Yes, exactly. So what PSI, then SISTA, where Jason Ward is, CBGA, then even Third World Network, we all came together recently, in fact, last week, that, Asia Pacific is the only region in the world which doesn't have a cooperative, let's say a cooperative or consensus body to fight or come at a consensus of what kind of taxation system is required in the region and fight together. So the whole idea was that, so we had this webinar last 17th of September, bringing together different issues. But what we also realize is that, the consensus building, why it's a difficult thing is, one, because trade unions by themselves, for instance, the issue of taxation is seen as such a complicated thing, and it is complicated. Unless somebody kind of explains it to us, it is written, and you have these, legal minds, tax lawyers who use legal language. So even we can't understand. So it is a very complicated thing. It needs to be broken down. So what PSI has been trying to do is that labor unions themselves get involved in these issues. The problem is that since it's a complicated thing, the level of what I feel, the level of involvement, there's a lot of appreciation for these issues. They understand these issues, but to be able to get involved in it requires so much of time that it takes away a lot of other time. The second issue, what we realized is that, the tax systems, let's say South Asia, if you see as a sub-region, and Southeast Asia another, they're totally different. So bringing together a cooperative body here together by itself can be a very difficult process. So yes, we had the first meeting, and we need to have other meetings to kind of have a deal or a cooperative system here. And I remember one of the questions you had asked is the UN tax body. That is what all developing countries have been fighting for, because UN is supposed to be far more, let's say, fairer in terms of looking at the aspects of what developing countries can face or are facing, whereas the OECD or the G7 are not really that much. So therefore, UN tax body, which is what we had been arguing for, is extremely important. But unfortunately, the deal right now has been taken over by OECD. So, this kind of started in 2015, that UN tax, there has to be a UN tax body. But UN by itself is also controlled to a large extent by US. So, so geopolitics really matters.
Well, yes, so that's what we are learning that's a point that is being reiterated in all the different discussions we are having. But I want to thank you very much, Malini. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking part in the discussion, which is complex, of course, but we are here to learn together, and we are lucky to have the instructors and Malini to join us for this conversation. So stay safe, everyone, and thanks a lot. And Malini, did you want to say something?
Yes, I do. I really want to thank all of you because, frankly, since we are, working from home, I do not get chance to discuss these issues, and with so much time, And thank you so much for excellent question. Even the question on environment, I think Filippo has left. But those are very interesting questions because it gives me food for thought. So thank you. Thank you so much for taking interest. I think it's a very complex topic, but the fact that you've taken so much interest really enthuses me. Thank you so much. And thank you, Elisa.